Hi everyone, it's Sue Plumb here to share a painting process video with you. Now today's process that I am sharing is for a mixed media canvas that I created as a guest designer for StencilGirl. Now you may recall that I was previously a member of the StencilGirl creative team, so for today this is a bit like coming home for me, being able to share a project on the blog and share my process with you using my stash of StencilGirl stencils. So for this project, I decided to actually create, as I said, a mixed media canvas. Now, you will know that traditionally, I generally tend to be a bit of a scrapbooker. I do traveler's notebooks and things like that, but sometimes I do like to splash out with a canvas, and this was one of those occasions. So I started with a canvas panel, which was 10 by 12. It was also pre-primed, so I didn't have to worry about putting any gesso down on this as the surface was already ready for me to go. Now, the first thing I started with was that I wanted to add a bit of collage to the background just to start off with my layers there. So you can see I've got that napkin that I've laid down. I believe that was a Jane Davenport one, and it's got that paint palette pattern on it. And all I did was separate out the background layers of the napkin, and I just used matte medium just to adhere it down onto the canvas. I also used some bits of that black and white spot tissue paper, which I just tore into some random pieces and adhered down onto the canvas, also using matte medium. So that was sort of my background layer. Now, if you are unfamiliar with mixed media, there's a couple of things that I want to get across to you. The first point is mixed media is all about layers. Layer upon layer upon layer. And it's a process. It's a process of getting there. So, as I said, I've started my canvas here with some collage on the background. Now, that's not only to provide me with some visual interest, but when you adhere the napkins and the tissue paper down, it also sort of crinkles up a bit and it gives you a little bit of texture and it gives you that really good starting point. So if you do want to tackle something like this, I would recommend that you lay down some type of textural layer to start with, whether it be, book paper or music paper, tissue paper, wrapping paper, napkins like I've used, whatever it may be. Next step, let's get some color down here. So you can see that I am using a variety of acrylic paints here. I had some Dilutions paint, I had some Flutter color paint, I had some Kaiser color paint, I also had some Montmartre paint. Just a variety of paints from my stash that I chose mainly because of their colors. So you can see that I'm working with a beautiful bright color palette there, and I'm applying my paint simply using my wonderful $1 silicone spatula that I got from Kmart. And when I'm working in a sort of abstract way like this, that's actually my preferred tool to use. I love the way the paint goes down on the page. It's easy to sort of manipulate. It's easy to clean off and switch between colors. I just wipe it off with a baby wipe, and it's just easy to sort of layer the color one on top of another. Now, you will see periodically that I do bring my heat gun into shot. This is particularly important if you are switching between warm and cool colors and the paints are still wet. If I'm working with colours from the same sort of warm or cool tones, I don't worry too much about drying off before I put the next colour on, but when I am switching between warms and cools, I always make sure it's dry before I put the next layer down. So you can see how I added, you can watch my process, but you can see how I've sort of added sort of yellows, I've added pinks, I've added greens, I've got some teal. And now I'm going in with just a little touch of purple, and I actually used my fingertip to apply the purple because that's my second favourite tool is my fingers. And it just gives you a bit of a different effect when you apply it with your fingers. It's a bit softer. It allows you to blend it in a bit more. And I really only wanted a touch of that purple in there just to bring that little bit of darkness to the canvas. So what I am actually focusing on today is I was creating a canvas using a printed napkin that I had, which features a picture of a toucan, and he was going to be my focal point for this design. So in keeping with that and in keeping with the colors that were on the napkin, I went with this sort of bright tropical, happy color palette, which is why I've chosen all of those colors. And you will see as I work that I am building up my layers with lots of green. I do use lots of green on this project because it is a toucan and he is, you know, sort of nestled in this tropical foliage and in the jungle, and that's kind of where I was heading with this. Now, you will see here in my process that I am actually going in with some white paint. Now, the reason that I'm going in with this white paint is because initially I had started to stencil on top of the coloured acrylic paint I had already applied along the bottom edge of the page. I was using a green distress oxide there and a sponge. And I started to sponge through that stencil along the bottom edge, and I realised that the detail wasn't showing up as well as I wanted it to. So I went back with that white paint and a brayer, and I just stripped back some of that colour from the area that I wanted to stencil. I also decided while I was there to strip back some of the colour sort of in the area where I was going to place the focal image, and I also stripped back a little bit of colour sort of randomly around the page just so that it didn't appear so busy. So once I'd got that white paint down, I went back with that same stencil, that same green distress oxide and the sponge, and I just sponged it again. And I was much, much happier because you could see the detail showing up on the page. So just to explain what happened there, if you see that I did get that same stencil and the distress oxide out twice. So as I said, this is all a process of layers. If you're not happy with something or you're not happy with the way it looks, cover it up, do something else. You also have to realise when you're working with mixed media like this, that your project will go through what we call the ugly stage. It is inevitable you will hit a point where you will look at your project and think, this is not going well, this is not going the way I anticipated, this is not looking how I thought it was going to look. Whatever those thoughts are, I really encourage you to push past that. Continue on, keep adding layers, and trust me, it will all come together in the end. So, getting back to the stencils that I'm using. You will see the second stencil I actually used back there, you can see I've added some sort of leafy detail along that left edge and also somewhat down the right edge as well. The stencil I used for that was called Loopy Leafing Vines Background from StencilGirl, and I used that same green distress oxide to add that detail. I also added some floral detail there using my teal archival ink, and again I used a sponge. And I used the Deconstructed Floral Bouquet stencil, and you can see that I've just focused on that large flower there, and I just moved it around the page just to give me that same pattern in different areas of the page. Now, I've got that looping leafy vine background. That's a little bit of a tongue twister, isn't it? Out again, and you can see that I am using again, only this time I am using it with a teal coloured texture paste. Now, when I'm doing mixed media projects like this, that's one of the things that I like to do is actually repeat the use of the same stencil, but use it with different mediums because it gives you a completely different effect. So initially where I'd used it with the sponge and the distress oxide, it had given me that sort of flat print that sort of melds into the background. But by repeating that stencil with the texture paste, it brings it more to the foreground and it brings it up closer to the eye. And you can see that that texture paste has got a little bit of a shine to it. It gives texture to the page. And I've also gone through with that Peony Blooms little stencil that you saw me use there, which is a floral one. And I've got pink texture paste, and I'm adding some stenciled pink peonies sort of around the edge again. So you can see what I'm going for here is I'm actually building up those layers and building up the colors and building up the detail all around the edge of this canvas. And I'm trying to keep that sort of central area there where I know that my focal image is going to go. I'm keeping that sort of relatively clear because I don't want to clutter that up too much, because when I do apply the focal image, I don't want it to be cluttered and I don't want it to be overwhelmed with the detail. And I think that's a bit of a trick when it comes to mixed media as well. Don't feel obliged to cover the entire page, because if you cover the entire page, you don't give your viewer's eye a place to rest anywhere. And if you cover the entire page and then stick a focal image on top, quite often that focal image is actually going to be a bit overwhelmed by your background work as well. So try and sort of keep a bit of your project clear for where you want people's eye to go. Now, this is the focal image I was talking about. See that little toucan? Isn't he gorgeous? Now, the way I got him off the napkin, you may have seen that I was working with, is I actually peeled away all those backing layers that come on a printed napkin, just leaving me with that very thin top layer that's got the print on it. And then I grabbed my little water brush there, which has simply just got water in it. And what I did was I painted around the edge of the piece of the image on the napkin that I wanted. And by moistening the fibers of the paper, you will find that you are able to just gently pull it away from the rest of the napkin and get the piece that you want to stick on your project. Now, you could also cut the image out with scissors, but the problem with using scissors is it gives you that very sharp, distinct edge, which when you apply it to a canvas like this, it's very hard to blend that hard line into your background and make it sort of seem as one. So I like to use this method with the water brush just to sort of separate it out, allow you to pull it away, and then I just use the matte medium to stick it down on the paper. Not the paper, the canvas, sorry. And you can see I've gone back to the napkin again, and I'm just finding some little areas that feature flowers and foliage. I'm using the same technique with the water brush just to pull those bits away that I want to use. Then I'm using matte medium to stick them down onto the canvas. And you can see how some of those pieces are actually like they're layered over the texture paste, they're layered over the paint. And one of the things you have to come to terms with mixed media is when you're working in layers like this, it is inevitable that you are going to cover up some of the things that you do in the previous layers. That's just how it works. But you will see by the end of the project that all of those layers work together to bring your finished piece together. Okay, so here I am adding some more of these sort of printed foliage pieces. I'm just trimming away the little excess bit that was hanging over the edge of the canvas there. And you'll see at the moment where I've stuck them on, they really stick out. They don't look like part of the background. They're not blended into the background. So how are we going to go about fixing that? We're going to add some more layers over the top. We're going to add layers over the top that make those layers that we've just added meld into the background. So you can see I've got quite a lot of detail going around the edge, and now I've added the focal image for my canvas. What I really need to do is bring some light to the foreground of this image. I really need to bring some lighter colors in, and I really need to make it appear as though there are leaves and branches and things that are in front of where the toucan is sitting on the canvas. So the way I'm doing that is I am using the little Maidenhair Fern stencil, and you can see I've got that sort of lighter green, that lime coloured paint, the dilutions paint there. I'm using a paintbrush and a technique called Stippling, where you simply dot it through the stencil onto the canvas, and I'm moving the stencil around the page just to add some of those extra sort of leaves to hang down from the top and poke up in front of the foreground and just help frame in that focal image. So you can see we've got plenty of layers, and you can see already how that printed image that I stuck on the canvas with the flower and the leaves in the top left corner there, you can see that just by simply adding one layer over the top, that is already starting to fade into the background. It's already becoming part of the background and not as noticeable with one layer over the top of it. Now, one of the things that struck me at this point in my canvas was that the black from the toucan, it was quite stark against the rest of the canvas. There was no other darkness to sort of balance it off. And I really wanted to tie that black in a little bit. So I just grabbed that rubber stamp there from Viva Las Vegas Stamps. It's got stars and little spots on it. And I just randomly stamped with some black StazOn ink, like I said, randomly around the canvas. And that little touch of black just helped to tie in the black of the toucan's feathers. Now, the next thing I was doing is I am working with a Stabilo black all pencil there. And what I'm actually doing is adding a little bit of shadowing just to the outline of him, just to help bring him forward from the background a bit. So I just sort of sketched along the outline of him, and then I used my water brush and my fingertip, and I just blended it out just to give that sort of slight shadowing behind him, and I just outlined his body a little bit just to help him to stand out. Now, once I had that shadowing done, you can see that that stencil there that I am using with the white paint is called Organized Chaos, and it was designed by Kat Kerr, and it is one of my all-time favorite StencilGirl stencils, and I use it all the time. And what I did with that, again, I used a stippling technique with that same brush and some white paint just to add those white sort of spots over the layers. And again, you can see how building those layers, look at how that piece up in the top left corner is now fading into the background and looks like it's in part of the background. Once I had that done, it was simply a matter of I added the title, which came from a Cocoa Vanilla Pocket Life card, which was that title, Good Vibes Only. I also used some Cocoa Vanilla Studio little phrase stickers on there. And the final step I'm going to put on this canvas is something just to give it some extra dimension. I needed something dimensional to come off the page, and I found this packet of vellum flowers in my stash. And I just used some liquid adhesive, a little dab of liquid adhesive on the back of them to stick some of these vellum flowers on. And you'll see how when you use liquid adhesive to stick these vellum pieces on, that they actually curl up away from the page and they give you beautiful dimension. And they just helped bring this canvas to life. So that was pretty much my process that I have talked you through there. You know, if you didn't get all of it, by all means, go back, watch it again, whatever. If you have any questions, don't be afraid to post them below and I will answer them for you as soon as possible. Thank you so much for watching this process today. I hope you've enjoyed it. Thank you so much to StencilGirl for having me back, having me come home again and share another project with you. That's it for me today. I hope you are feeling inspired. Get those stencils out, get those paints out, and get creative. Thanks so much for joining me. I'll see you next time. Bye.